welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. Are you the parent of a PDA child or teen and dreading going back to school in the fall? So, this is coming up quick for most of us. I am Casey. I'm the founder of At Peace Parents, and we have helped hundreds of parents of PDA children and teens find peace while parenting and also support them with the skills, clarity, and tools that they need in order to help their child or teen thrive as the best version of themselves. So today we're going to be talking about back to school advocacy and some of the tools we can use to actually get your child's needs met in the context of school, especially a public school in the United States. So the examples I'm going to be using are from the US, but can be applied to other geographic locations as well. Okay, so today we're going to do 7 things. I'm going to give you a little bit of tough love that I hope will free you. I'm going to talk about the scope of today's free training. 3, I'm going to talk about how to be strategic in our communication with teachers and administrators and the people who hold the reins of what our child gets access to, either through an individualized education plan, a 504, or if you're in another country context, those will have different names. 4th, we're going to talk about identifying your child's specific needs so that we're not existing just in generalities that sometimes make communication with teachers and administrators difficult. 5th, we're going to talk very briefly about the 12 most effective accommodations that you can use as a structure to brainstorm how to meet your child's needs. And then we're going to do a little bit of workshopping with a nonviolent communication tool called the Plato framework for making nonviolent communication requests on behalf of your child. And then we're going to talk about how this can serve you to collect data on what's happening for your child with your specific school, which can inform your decisions about whether or not this is the right context for them. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, I'm going to start with some tough love that is going to be hard to hear, but it needs to be said because it will help you gain clarity on your agency and hopefully find freedom. Okay? So the thing we want to start accepting is that if your child is starting school or your teen is starting school in 2 weeks or a week, or maybe they've already started, you're not going to be able to change the educational system or a school by yourself in the moment when you and your family are struggling. Okay? So we have to recognize and radically accept the constraints within which we're working when we're working in a public school or even a private school. And we're doing this in the context of school refusal or burnout and our own family feeling like it's chaos and falling apart. My strong belief is that the best approach for families is to really focus on stabilizing your family in a strategic way and then focusing on structural advocacy issues from a place of your own stability. So it is with that spirit that we're going to be talking about very pragmatic, very strategic, step-by-step, rational approaches to chunking down the problems and solving the problems for your unique family rather than worrying about big picture advocacy or changing the system in this moment. Okay, that doesn't mean that a year from now, when your family is more stable, you can't focus more on advocacy or, legal recourse or starting your own nonprofit. But none of us can do that from a place of, we're having our own panic attacks in the morning because our child is physically fighting us and climbing on top of the van in the school parking lot and eloping, and we can't even get them into the public school. Okay. And then on the other side of that, we have the principal who's watching this and is trying to employ behavioral techniques and tough love to the child making it less likely that they will get into the building. Okay, so that's not a nervous system context for a parent to be trying to change a system. Okay, so that's my little first tough love. So we're going to radically accept the constraints within which we're working, and we're going to find agency, movement, and progress within those constraints. Okay, so let's talk about the scope of today's mini free training. So yesterday on Instagram, I asked our community to submit their concerns, challenges, or specific needs of their child or teen in the context of school. And we got a lot of great information and questions, but I want to clarify that the scope of today's free training is not about decision making. Okay, decision making is something that we use a different tool for, which is called cost-benefit decision making within constraints, and that would be a different training. Okay, so the types of questions that fall into the decision making category are the following. And these are just examples from what you parents submitted to me yesterday. Extreme school refusal, no resources to support separation, anxiety, or help him co-regulate. Refusing to go to school, but tells me he likes it once he's there. How to know to try school again or never again. Homeschool, refusing to even talk about what schoolwork will look like this semester. My son has IEP services, but refuses to go to middle school, so they don't think they need to give him services. This is his disability. Attendance, feeling stuck with school refusal, unsure how to navigate. Okay, so those are all great examples of challenges or questions that we would address. Like, for example, if you were in the Paradigm Shift program or we were working directly together with a coach, we would use the decision-making tool of cost-benefit decision-making. Okay, so today we're not going to do that. Today we're going to be focusing on strategy and tools for advocacy if your child is going to school and we don't have to make decisions about whether or not we're pulling them out of school. But part of this will give you data points that can inform that decision down the line. Okay? So everything I'm going to talk about today is from my experience, my lived experience as a parent who had to remove her child from the public school, and he couldn't access school for about 1.5 years. And also the work that we've done at Peace Parents now with over 1,000 parents of PDA children and teens. So this is what we have found works best, okay? And if something else has worked for you, awesome. But this is like when you've tried to give the teacher the one pager and they're like, I don't understand this. Or when you're trying to explain about PDA and they're like, I don't believe in PDA. Or your child is so high masking that nobody believes it, okay? So the first thing we want to start experimenting with is being really strategic about how we talk about our child's needs and using a common language that can bridge the gap between you and the teacher and or administrator and or special education specialist. And it might have nothing to do with talking about PDA. Okay, so here are some of the questions I received that are in line with this particular tool or approach, okay? How do I succinctly explain to teachers about PDA without sounding like a crazy person? How do I explain PDA to staff and peers so it is understood? I need to be pointed towards academic studies so that I can back my advocacy. New school, new everything. A one-pager to share with staff. School saying no PDA, but she masks. Okay, so these are all challenges that many of us have faced where we want to explain PDA, and I've done this myself, where we're like, it's a nervous system disability, it's a survival drive for autonomy, it's part of the autism spectrum, and we want to give research to back it up. Maybe we even have a pediatrician who's on our side. But what I've found time and time again, and this is true from my own experience, is that advocating, convincing, and talking about PDA actually doesn't work in a school context, okay? If it does, awesome. So glad you're in an awesome school. Why is this the case? People don't get it, and they don't want to get it, okay? This is another part of our radical acceptance of we're going to drop trying to convince about PDA. And we're going to use different language that teachers and educators already understand so that it doesn't set off their anxiety and threat response and defense mechanism for their own training and expertise, where they're like, look, it's not in the DSM-5. We haven't received training on it. What I've looked into it in terms of studies, it's literally just about whether or not PDA exists. So why should I adjust my classroom based on something that I don't understand and that doesn't have institutional backing? Okay, so that sucks. I wish it wasn't that way, but again, we're going to radically accept the constraints that exist in this moment and be strategic within those constraints. Okay, so one of the things that we want to start doing, and it might mean, and this may be controversial to some, but this is my perspective, we may need to use words that aren't politically correct in order to bridge that gap. Okay, so some of the language that parents have found successful is, my child has severe anxiety. My child is high functioning autistic. They're severe ADHD, but we use trauma-informed approaches. Okay, so we want to identify words that are true. Maybe your child has a diagnosis of ADHD and not PDA, which will qualify them not for an individualized education plan unless they're struggling with learning, but will qualify them for a 504 plan, for example, okay? Or maybe they have a generalized anxiety diagnosis. What we want to do is we want to use those words so that the person on the receiving end understands it, okay? Let's say, though, that, and we're going to build on this, instead of trying to explain and convince, we're just going to state what's true. Like, my child has severe anxiety and is high functioning autistic, full stop. Or my child has ADHD and has severe anxiety. Or, we've found with our pediatrician that trauma-informed approaches are the most supportive. Okay, so that's the amount of explanation that you need to give. You don't need to convince anyone that those things exist. Use what's true and then stop trying to explain or convince further. Because what we're going to focus on is needs and requests rather than diagnoses, okay? But before we do that, in this first category about strategy, if you're the recipients of your requests, like teachers, therapists, psychologists, administrators are familiar with PDA and sort of understanding, okay, PDA exists. Even that, they might get stuck on the demand thing, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So teachers get really scared about, well, how do I still teach a kid when I have to lower all the demands? How can they actually learn? So we also want to get away from a focus on demands because it's actually more about autonomy. That is what regulates the PDA's nervous system. The neuroception around feeling equal to or above another and getting to have true freedom and choice around participation. Let me give you an example. Let's say our child is refusing to participate in math. There can be lots of things that make this difficult. Maybe it is because there isn't autonomy. Okay, so for example, my son, when he did his brief stint in public school, would refuse to participate in math, and he really did not want to do the rote exercises. Okay, so the most superficial understanding of PDA is okay, let's lower the demand. They don't have to do math. But it's not the demand, it's the lack of autonomy. Okay, when he went to private school, he friggin' loved math. Why? Because he had autonomy around movement. He could go out in the hallway and use beads, which were kinetic, to understand math and put them all the way up, down the hall with another friend. He didn't have someone standing over him when he was in a seat. Okay? So it wasn't math as a demand. It was how we're doing math and what type of autonomy is imbued within it. If we're only looking at it as the demand, right? We could look objectively at a kid doing math in the hallway with beads and stringing them up and down visually and running up and down the hallway. That is a physical demand more so than sitting in a chair and doing math exercises, right? Maybe the demand is different, but we want to really start thinking more about nervous system equality and autonomy rather than just blanket demands, because teachers freak out, right? Because their whole job is to teach. And it's really hard to teach without having any demands on a child, right? So this is something to experiment with, these two shifts. Okay? So now that we've talked briefly about strategy around our language and dropping trying to convince about PDA and rather just honing in on bridging with words that people understand and accept and you don't have to argue about, then we're going to go into the next step, which is identifying specific needs of your child. Okay? So often when we're thinking about our children's needs or our teens' needs, it can be hard to chunk down into specific granular things, right? Like we often want to say, my child needs flexibility. My child needs novelty. My child needs autonomy. They need nervous system safety and humor. But on the receiving end of whether it's written into an IEP or you're talking in a conference with a teacher, it's too general for them to understand and ground into the practice of actually using it in their classroom to help your kid. Okay, so we have to do a little bit of work to bridge this gap. And I'm going to give you 2 ways to do that. But before I do, I want to just read some of the questions that were submitted, and we're going to use some of these as examples. Okay, so like how to actually take the problem, identify the need, use a structure to brainstorm around what would help, and then use the nonviolent communication tool to communicate it to the teacher. Okay, so here's just a sample of what this community submitted yesterday. 5th grader refuses to write in the classroom. PDA kid seeks approval and praise. This seems contrary to the literature. What do we do about them not winning? Getting specific for what lowered demands actually look like. A request from teacher to do an assignment is too much of a loss of autonomy. When the school staff speak to my child, teacher's great, but music, gym, custodian can set him off. Idea for 504 to stop getting in trouble for things he can't control. Stop losing recess. Not being understood, they're equalizing misunderstood for being rude and not using kind words. Okay, so these are all great examples of challenges, problems, or desires for changing things, right? And what's our tendency? We get upset as parents. Of course, I did the same. I spent a year and a half in this space of like, I'm so angry because I've communicated what PDA is and they're not getting it, and yet they're still doing the things I asked them not to do. Spent a lot of time in that space, like many of you, right? So when we have these specific challenges, what we tend to do as parents is we want to go back to the IEP meeting or back to the teacher and try and explain PDA again, try and convince about PDA. And again, we're getting back into that cycle of like not bridging communication. So instead, we want to get granular and we want to identify needs that could be related to ADHD. They could be related to generalized anxiety. They could be related to autism. It doesn't matter. It's whatever your kid's diagnosis is, so that we're connecting what they already understand to what we're asking for. Okay? So again, we're dropping PDA unless you have a receptive audience. This is going to save you some heartache and time, and it's something to experiment with, okay? So we have these challenges. How do we start to chunk it down? So the first thing we want to do is, and I'm not going to be able to go into a deep workshop or training on every single one of these accommodations. So if it's something that you want to go deeper into, we do have the accommodation workshop, which you can go into these accommodations. But what we want to do is use it as a framework. Okay. So there's 12 effective accommodations for a PDA child or teen. And I'm just going to list them: autonomy, equality, humor, play, lowered demands, signals of nervous system safety, communication, accommodations, novelty, dopamine, sensory intense experience, and strewing. Okay, so those are the 9 proactive accommodations that we can chunk down into requests for our child or teen in the classroom. And then we have the 3 responsive accommodations for when our child is activated, like diffusion, de-escalation, and risk mitigation. Okay, so we're not going to get deep into that. I do have content on all of these in the podcast if you want to go through it and look deeper into what each of these are. But this is the structure that you can just write down those 12 accommodations, look at the problem you have, the 12 accommodations, and this can help you start to think specifically about what your request is going to be. Okay, so now we're going to move to the tool that we found to be effective in communicating, bridging this communication gap. So this is called the Plato framework from nonviolent communication. I did not invent this. I'm going to cite the source when I put this up as a tile. And this is just a simple framework that we can use to make single specific requests that in which we do not have to say so that or because of. Okay, we're just making requests. And this is why I said it doesn't matter if they don't understand PDA, because you have a right to make requests if your child has anxiety, if your child has PTSD, if your child has ADHD, if your child has an autism diagnosis. You don't have to qualify it. You just get to make the request based on the need. Okay? And we're leaving out the my child needs this because, or my child needs this so that, because the so that or because of is where we lose the teacher or the administrator because they can argue with that. They can't argue with a request. They can only say yes, no, however, we can do this, or no. Okay, so we're simplifying. Let's ground it. The Plato framework is P, person, L, location, A, action, T, time, and O, object, if there is an object. Okay? And don't worry if this is like a lot to take in on a live. It's going to be, I'm going to have the recording for you, or if you're listening to the replay, just, maybe pause the episode or the video and write this down for yourself, and it can start to structure your thinking. Okay. So I'm going to use some examples that I came up with, and then we can go back to your ideas and use it with the Plato framework. Okay, let's say the first need you want to address, or a place where you think like, this is really, really a hard thing for my kid and it's making it difficult for them to access school. Maybe they're in a classroom like my son was in public school, where they limited how much he could use the bathroom and he had to ask, and he was often told no. Okay, going to the bathroom can be an adaptive avoidance response that's not super disruptive and simply gives the child more bodily autonomy and spatial or movement autonomy, right? But a lot of public schools won't allow that. So what we can do is we can make our Plato requests. So we're going to identify the person, let's say Cooper. Location is, let's say, gym class is where the problem is. Action, we've come up with an idea for an action instead of having to ask for permission and then potentially being told no. Maybe the request is that he has a red card he can hand to the gym teacher during gym. So that's the time. And then the object is the red card itself. Okay. So then the request becomes simple. I'd like to make a request. During the hour that Cooper is in gym class, can he give the gym teacher a red card when he needs to go to the bathroom so that he can leave when he needs to? Period. Okay? Again, why don't we say because he needs autonomy or because he's PDA or because he's autistic? Then if we leave that on to the Plato request, then what happens? The teacher says, I don't think they're autistic. They're really social, right? Or I don't think he really needs that, right? Because he doesn't really seem to need to use the bathroom. We want to cut off the place where they can argue with us and simply make a request, okay? And all they can say is, yes, we can do that. No, we can't do that. But maybe we can come up with, maybe a chart for the whole classroom where someone writes their name when they need to go to the bathroom and all the classroom gets to do it, for example. Or the answer is no. Okay, and then you have a data point, a concrete data point that can both inform your decision making and your documentation about actual support that your child is receiving or not. Okay, and this is going to get you clarity, because often, like if we had come to the gym teacher and said, like, my son needs more autonomy around going to the bathroom, it's like the gym teacher's like, okay, like, what does that even mean, right? Or we have a situation where we think we're operating in a school environment where people are going to be flexible and support us because that's what they say to us and that's what they say on paper. But then when we actually make the requests that help our child, the answer is no. Okay? And that sucks and it's triggering and it's horrible. But then we have the information we need, and lots of those data points will tell us we might need to make a different decision here. We might either need to seek out a lawyer, we might need to change gym classes, we might need to think about a different school. But until we can ground this, it's going to be very difficult for parents to make decisions and for us to make progress. But there's also cases where the gym teacher's like, sure, we can do that, right? Because there's a solution given to them and it's not disruptive to the classroom. Or they might say, no, we can't do that because like it's unfair to the rest of the kids, but I'm open to setting up a system that works for all the kids, right? So we want to find where we can find that traction. So let's take another one. Like, one of the things that PDA kids need the most and never qualify for because they don't have as high of social communication difficulties on average. Okay, I know that there are like non-speaking PDAers. I know that there are PDA autistic individuals who do struggle a lot with social communication, but often our PDA children who are not receiving support in schools are those that they're either high masking, they don't appear autistic, and they don't actually seem to have as high like social communication or verbal needs, right? And so like those aren't the kids that are going to be qualified for a parapro, because the paraprofessionals or the individual support system is designed around non-PDA autistic needs, which is communication and restricted and repetitive interests, okay? So yet our kids and teens, even if it doesn't look like it, one of the most impactful accommodations is having another safe nervous system next to them, okay? So we don't want to go to this teacher and be like, hey, my child needs undivided attention and signals of nervous system safety all day, right? Because the teacher is going to be like, I have a classroom of 25 kids and your kid doesn't qualify for a parapro, so how am I supposed to do that, right? So we want to chunk it down. So let's say we identify a particular time of the day where they struggle more than others, right? Maybe they're cool with, the math and science, but like reading and writing is really hard, okay? So we're going to use the Plato framework again to make a request. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. So maybe we can identify not a parapro, but we identify like a friend that they have that serves as a safe nervous system, but they don't get seated next to them because maybe they're a distraction. I know this because my son was the same way. Okay, but let's say Claire is the PDA daughter and Julie is her safe nervous system in the classroom. It's the person she gravitates towards. But Claire and Julie are not usually sitting together because the teacher doesn't want them to talk and stuff. But let's say it's free reading. So the person of the Plato framework would be Claire and Julie. The location might be the desk next to Julie. The action is reading and writing. Exercises. The time is the 1 hour of reading. And maybe there's an object, maybe there's not. Maybe it's like the object is the writing exercise and the activity book. Okay? So then we make a request, very specific request, without even needing to talk about the nervous system safety or the undivided attention. We can just ask, can I make a request? Would it be possible during the 1 hour of reading practice and writing practice for Claire to be seated next to Julie and to work together for the writing exercises? Period. Not so that, not because of, Not, this would really help my kids' PDA, because as soon as we add that on, it's going to be is she really PDA? What's PDA, right? And so we just have that request. And then again, the teacher can say, sure. The teacher can say, no, but I could seat Claire next to me and we could work together while the other kids are doing their free stuff, right? So that might be a negotiation. Or the answer is simply no. No, we can't do that. We need to keep the seating arrangements. It's too disruptive for my classroom to have Claire and Julie sit together. Okay. But what happens then? We're getting clarity. We're getting clarity on, are we gaining traction with this teacher? Can we negotiate with them? Or are they so rigid and so set in their ways that they can't even meet simple requests based on the fact that my child has any neurotype difference, right? And most of you have some sort of documentation of some sort of condition, right? Like whether it's generalized anxiety, whether it's ADHD, whether it's like autism, dyslexia, whatever it is, right? And so we need to get those data points. And if we continually get the data points that the answer is no, we need to start going back to our decision making, right? Which, as I said, is outside of the scope of today's training. But I'm also framing this for you, right? Because if the answer, the data point that you get after nonviolent communication requests using this framework is always no, then you're going to have to radically accept that it's a no continually and then start to make decisions within that constraint. Okay. But this tool will give you clarity on whether or not it's a constraint, right? What I mean by a constraint is just something that like we don't have control over and can't change in the present moment. We can't change the public school system. We can't change a teacher who's just not going to be flexible, right? And this is a different approach than like, getting all the legal advocacy behind you, which is like something I tried to do and failed at, right? And I was so burned out, I could not make progress. I was like consulting with lawyers and meeting with the superintendent, and like it was inordinately stressful. At the same time, my son was doing school refusal. He was coming down and having huge panic attacks. It just didn't work. So I don't want you to go through the year and a half that I went through. And if you are going through it, I want to give you an opportunity to experiment with something different that will allow you to have more agency. Okay? So I'm going to give you one more example from a teen, and then we're going to go back to what you guys submitted and pick a couple examples that we can workshop together with the Plato framework. Okay? So let's say your teen has trouble making it through the school day, or you see that being in school, even if they're like surface level doing okay and complying and like maybe even like an ideal student because they're internalizing all the stress, but you're seeing it come out after school where they're shutting down or they're having a lot of equalizing and aggression, maybe towards you or their sibling, and you're seeing the impact on their basic needs, like they're increasingly stopping eating, maybe they're having encopresis or gastrointestinal issues. You're seeing the nervous system physiological impact coming out more and more in their basic needs. So we might identify the need that they have as lowering the demand of how much they're at school, and even more specifically, identifying which days and when they might need more autonomy around attendance. Okay. And I know this is a very difficult thing to advocate for because schools are loath to adjust their schedules, like arriving late or doing half days like that. From my experience in this space with parents, that's one of the accommodations that parents need most for their children. And it's the one that schools are most hesitant to provide because of the structure of the school and what they're legally required to provide and track in terms of attendance. But we always want to try, right? We never know exactly how people are going to respond when they understand what we're asking for and there's a specific solution that we're providing. Okay? So let's say we've identified that Wednesday afternoons, there's 2 free hours where like the teens are expected to like work on their homework or, study hours. So it's like they're just expected to sit there and do quiet work. And I'm sure to the PDA teen, they're like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Why do I have to be sitting here? Right? And I kind of agree. So maybe the parent is making a request specifically. So let's say this teen is named John. John is the person, P. Location is school study hour in their like cohort's classroom. The action is leaving school. Time, 2 hours before school ends. And then there's no object. So it's just Plat instead of Plato. Okay, so can I make a request? Would it be possible for John to leave school 2 hours early on Wednesdays during his study hour and come home to work on his schoolwork at home? Okay, period. No rationale. They already have the rationale. They already know that there's anxiety or they already know that there's ADHD. You don't have to continually explain it. And when you do, it gives them an out because they will argue. We're just making a request. The administrators or teachers can say 3 things. Yes, they can do that. Awesome. Making progress. Let's go to the next request. They can say no, but no, he can't leave 2 hours early, but he could leave an hour earlier every day, actually. Great, right? We're making progress. We're negotiating. Or the answer is no. The answer is no, and that's a data point. And the more data we get, the more we can understand where our agency is and where we can negotiate and maneuver within really tough constraints that we don't have control over, like the federally regulated public school system, right? Okay, so we're going to finish up here with this training by using some of what you guys submitted. I think I'll do 2 or 3. Okay, let's do refusal to write, school staff speaking to child, and idea for stopping getting in trouble for things he can't control, stop losing recess. Okay, so let's start with a 5th grader who's refusing to write. And we're going to get as creative and like pie in the sky as we want, because with negotiation, you can always start with something that they're definitely going to say no to, but it can sometimes lead to the middle option. Remember, there's yes, no, but, and no. If they get to the middle option, then we have negotiation. And maybe we're like, let's say we start with an opening bid that they're like, heck no. We may find some negotiating space in the middle of the no, but. Okay, so we want to trust that we can try and get more information using this process. Okay, so let's say the 5th grader refuses to write. Our instinct is we're stressed. We try and convince them about PDA. We try and explain about PDA. They don't believe PDA. They're still in the framework of, we need to make this kid do X, right? And even if we're like, look, they need to lower the demands around writing, or they need more autonomy or choice around writing, the teacher still probably doesn't know what that means. Okay. They're like, okay, but like, what does that mean? Like, does that mean they never do their homework? Does that mean we never expect them to write? Like, how are they going to participate in the classroom? Okay. So let's take this and break it down into something that's actionable using the Plato framework. Okay. I can think off the top of my head of 2 examples because my son has this challenge as well. So let's say we identify 2 scenarios, like homework after school. I mean, the request might be like, is it possible not to do homework after school for the next month? Yes, no, but, or no. But we're going to get even more granular and say the kid is doing the homework, but they don't want to write. And then there's going to be an example in the classroom. Like, let's say there's a particular time when the child refuses to write. And let's say it is the time of the day when they're doing their reading and writing activity. They need to do like a journal entry or a short story. And maybe that's once a day. Let's just call it reading, writing time. So let's start with the Plato framework. So the person would be, let's call him Cooper. The location would be the classroom. the action, let's think of a solution. So there's a couple things I can think about off the top of my head. Like potentially, could they speak to a teacher or an extra parapro in the classroom and they write for them? Could they record it into a recording device? Could they, get to do another activity that's in line with the theme of storytelling and sentence structure that doesn't involve writing, right? And I know this can be triggering if you're a teacher listening, and it might even be triggering as a parent because you're like, wait, but they need that skill. But remember the logic of PDA for your purposes is that when they're in their survival brain, that red part of the brain right there, they can't learn or access the skills that they might already have, right? Your child might already know how to write very well and read. And even if they don't, the more we push them, the longer they stay in that part of the brain where they can't actually retain or access information like learning, cause and effect, fine motor skills, etc. Okay? So time might be the 1 hour. And then object, in this case, it could be like a recording device. It could be, if we're doing an alternative to the writing itself, it could be like materials for learning sentence structure that they can move around, like more of a Montessori approach. And maybe you have to buy it, but we're thinking creatively here within our constraints. So let's try it with the recording idea or with another person helping. I'd like to make a request. Would it be possible for Cooper, when he's in the classroom during the reading writing hour each day, to participate by recording his ideas for storytelling and reflection, and then he and I can work on it after school, or I can write it out for him after school and hand it back to the teacher the next day. Okay? This is outside of the box thinking. However, we don't know when we present a real solution what the teacher's going to say. Maybe they're like, okay, right? Like they have a classroom of 25 kids. They're stressed. They don't have enough resources. They've been fighting with this kid. And then the parent comes in with a solution. They might say yes. They might not, but we're going to try, right? We're going to try. They might say yes. They might say no, but we have a parapro for this other autistic child, and technically they can help other kids during that hour. And because the autistic kid during this hour is doing a different activity than the rest of the class or has no trouble writing and reading, maybe you can dictate to the parapro and they write it down, right? Or maybe the request is even different. I'd like to make a request. Would it be possible for Cooper, while he's in the classroom during the reading and writing hour, to use some materials, physical materials that are about what you guys are working on, which is like sentence structure and grammar, so that he's still working on the topics, but not required to write, right? These are just creative ideas. And I know that when we're stressed and when our kid isn't accessing learning and when they're, erupting in the classroom and stuff, this is not the type of creative thinking that's easy to do because you are not in your thinking brain, right? You're in your own nervous system response. And that's why hopefully this is helpful to structure your thinking and give you something to practice. We can also say I don't know if this would be possible, but this is something that I've done in the past, which is during the very difficult moments or times of the day, I have physically gone to the school and sat outside for help if needed at his private school, right? So that's something you could even ask for, okay? Or if it's like homework, let me give you an example from my own life. My son gets into that cognitive loop that many of our children do, which is, maybe the teacher's super flexible and they're like, I don't need them to do homework. It's okay if they're having panic attacks and can't do the homework after school. But then the child, like my son, will be like, but I have to because all the other kids are doing it. And then he gets into this situation where he can't do the homework, but he can't not do the homework. And he's just escalating into panic. Okay. So one of the things we've done, and this is around writing, is to have him do the content verbally, right? For vocab, where he says what he thinks the words are and we talk about them, and then I or my husband write it. It's our writing, okay? It's not because my son can't write. It's because he can't access the skill when he is in his survival brain. So what would be the nonviolent communication request using Plato for this particular solution, right? Can I make a request? Would it be possible for me, I'm the person, or my husband, at home location, action, to write the answers to my son's homework during the time that we're doing homework together? And maybe the object is the vocabulary booklet, or it's even the math worksheet, right? And the teacher can be like, thankfully at our school, the teachers were like, yeah, that's fine. Like, he's still participating. He's still learning the vocabulary. They'd already said we don't need to do the homework, but another challenge presented, which is common with PDA kids and teens, is the cognitive loop, where we lower the demand and then they're like, but I have to do it, right? So this is very complicated, but we're always trying to find solutions to granular problems so that we can continue to move forward, find our agency, and make progress. Okay. Let me just pause for a second. Yeah, I know it's incredibly stressful, and I understand how it feels to feel like even if you do have a situation that's supportive, like the other shoe can drop at any moment, right? And then it's like, well, how do I scramble to continue to work if they're refusing school and stuff? Okay, so let's do 2 more submitted by you guys. Okay, so when school staff speak to my child is the challenge. Teacher is great, but music, gym, custodian can set him off. Okay, so this is the problem. We want to identify the need and what we can do about it, and then use the Plato framework. So for this, I'd go into communication accommodations, which is number 7 of the 12 most effective accommodations. And we would have some strategies, right? We would have reducing speech. We would have using declarative language. We would have paying attention to tone and prosody, which just means like these kids can misinterpret neutral tones and facial expressions as threatening. And so we want to be cognizant and intentional about our tone, our body movements, and our facial expressions so that we're signaling mammal to mammal, hey, you're safe. Your nervous system's safe on a subconscious level. Okay, so then using the structure of the 12 most effective accommodations, if we go to the communication accommodations, we can see we have 3 ideas right off the bat. So reducing speech, using declarative language, paying attention to tone and prosody. And then we're like, okay, strategically, which one of these can I actually ask the custodian to do or talk to the teachers about this? Maybe it's just, don't talk to my kid if you don't have to, right? Like, just smile at them and like, don't ask them a bunch of questions, right? So maybe we just simplify using the Plato framework. Maybe the problem is they're asking a lot of questions, or maybe the problem is they're criticizing or commenting in a way that's setting off your PDA child or teen's nervous system. So let's make a request that they reduce speech and just focus on smiling at them instead of asking questions. Okay? So the person, let's say the custodian, the location in the hallways or at lunch, action, not speaking and smiling instead. This can also be adapted to like a cafeteria environment where like the lunch ladies are like, well, I would never let my kid only eat Cheetos. And then the PDA kid hears it and they're like, nervous system goes off and they feel like they're a bad kid because they're eating crunchy processed foods when other kids have like bento boxes of all their like organic yummies and having no trouble eating it. And so the request is simple. And it's simply like, how can we find a way for the custodian to not activate our child's nervous system? So the request becomes, would it be possible when custodian is in the hallway or in the cafeteria and sees Cooper during lunch, that they not speak to my child and rather just smile at them for the duration of lunch or of the break between classes? That's it. And then it can be, T stands for timing, time. So like we want things to be time bound. We're trying to make things as specific as possible so that the recipient of our request can say, yes, I can do that. No, I can't, but I can do Y, or no, which provides us with a data point and clarity to inform our decisions about whether or not certain teachers, certain environments, certain public schools are actually a place where our child can get the services they need, regardless of their diagnosis or what's legally stated in their IEP or 504, because often it's not followed. So this is what I have for you guys today. I hope these tools and strategies help you reduce your anxiety in the weeks ahead, have clarity on where we can make progress within tough constraints and institution that's not set up for our unique kiddos, and to have some real tools that we can sink our teeth into and start practicing in the context of our particular homes. Okay? So have a good start to school, everyone. You're not alone, and we're all rooting for you here at Peace Parents. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.